Hi folks, how's it going? It's James here. Welcome to another video. This is going to be an artist profile of a band and an artist that I've loved for a long time, and that is World Party. This is one of the first records I ever showed on the vinyl community. I think it was in my very first ever Vinyl Finds video. This is World Party's debut album, Private Revolution, and on the cover there you can see the band's resident genius, auteur, songwriter-composer Karl Wallinger, formerly of the Waterboys. It's quite amazing, you know, the Waterboys featured one complete total genius, which is Mike Scott, and then all the time there was another genius in waiting. Karl Wallinger was a fairly peripheral figure in the Waterboys, but he kind of left the band, went off to form his own group or outfit, which was World Party, and really kind of carved a name for himself really in the late 80s going into the 90s. I first became aware of World Party it was the early 90s. I suspect I probably heard them for the first time on Bob Harris's Radio 2 late night show. I used to pick up a lot of good music on there, and the first song I ever heard by them was Is It Like Today?
Is it like today? Then there came a day, man packed, who says, how could it come to this? I'm really worried about my creation.
Brilliant song off their third album, and but this CD single had a couple of extra tracks. It had Message in the Box, which is from the second album.
The word says, put the message in the box, put the box into the car, drive the car around the world until you get home.
Goodbye Jumbo, and then it also has a demo version of The Little Man Within, a song which ended up on the first album, and I used to love those two songs. I used to drive around, you know, when I was a young man, driving around in Leeds and West Yorkshire, just playing those songs constantly, just on repeat on my tape deck on my car. I just absolutely loved them, and I carried on listening to World Party. They were not really a band that were ever kind of trendy or cool. If you go from the late 80s, you know, stuff like the Stone Roses came around in England, and then it went into grunge, and then it went into Britpop, and there was a lot happening in that period. But World Party were always kind of on the outside of that. I think maybe because Karl Wallinger was an older musician. He was kind of older than the Manchester people. He was older than the Britpop crowd. He wasn't as old as, you know, your Paul McCartneys and your, you know, whatever, but he was a bit too old to be considered kind of, you know, part of the in crowd, but he just made some great music. So I'm going to quickly talk you through the releases that I have, talk you through a little bit of history. So Karl Wallinger, actually, he started out in the Waterboys. He left that band in 1986, and the first album, Private Revolution, he recorded at his own home studio, and it yielded two minor hits in the UK, Private Revolution and Ship of Fools. And then he followed this album up. This is a good album, and but I think World Party were one of those bands who they kind of got better as they went along. You know, it's not a kind of absolute top draw record, but it does contain some good tunes. The track that really stands out for me on this album is Ship of Fools. So just before we go on to look at the other releases, just a bit of like a brief description of World Party. If you've not heard World Party, or if you're not sure that they're for you, you have to imagine a kind of a mixture of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan and Prince, essentially. Those are the four kind of main areas, with a bit of Stevie Wonder thrown in. It really is that special. Karl Wallinger has a voice very reminiscent at times of kind of early to mid 1970s Rolling Stones. So think of Mick Jagger's vocal style on albums such as It's Only Rock and Roll, or maybe even Goat's Head Soup, that kind of slight Brit American drawl, but he manages to mix that up with classic 60s Bob Dylan, think kind of Highway 61 era Dylan. But then he also has a very Beatlesy, McCartney-esque way with the tune, which is where the Beatles thing comes in, and some of the tracks do sound like kind of early Beatles, maybe sort of Help era, slightly kind of folky. And then you've got the Stevie Wonder thing, or perhaps like Stevie Wonder, Todd Rundgren. I mean, Karl Wallinger is basically, he's a studio auteur. In other words, you know, World Party was the name of his creative outfit, but it was all him really. I mean, he did employ other musicians to help him out, but I think increasingly as he went along, he kind of ended up doing it all himself. And he's one of those great kind of studio musicians who can just patch things together in the studio and make things just sound fantastic. And it's him kind of playing all the parts and singing all the parts. And World Party's music is very, very intricately put together. They're a classic headphone band. You know, I think he close mics everything, and when he comes to do the mix, it's very, very detailed. It's like a mosaic. You can hear all kinds of things in the stereo picture. You've got a tambourine here and a shaker there, and the vocals are quite compressed. He does brilliant harmonies, and it's just a very intricate sound. The Stevie Wonder and the Prince thing is quite interesting because he has the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan stuff, but it's kind of given a more contemporary 80s kind of sheen with a bit of R&B coming through. I think he was quite influenced by R&B. So this was the second album. This is Goodbye Jumbo. And I should have mentioned actually, World Party, as the name implies, always had a kind of ecological, environmentally friendly kind of attitude to lyrics. You know, songs about creatures becoming extinct and the need to look after the planet and that kind of thing. So this record contains the song Put the Message in the Box, and Is It Too Late is a good album opener. Sounds like early Beatles. Really good album. This was quite a successful record for him. Let's just see how it did. Way Down Now was a UK hit single, as was Put the Message in the Box. And Karl actually collaborated with Guy Chambers on some of the tracks. I think Guy Chambers went on in later years to work with Robbie Williams, and we'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, that was a really great album. That's Goodbye Jumbo. Okay, so then we come to the album Bang, which came out, I think this came out in 93. This reached number 2 in the UK album charts. Is It Like Today got to number 19 on the UK singles chart. So, you know, not a massive chart placing singles wise, but the album did well, got to number 2. And this is a great record as well. I think this is maybe more of a solo effort, although there are 3 people pictured. There are some great tracks on this record. One of my favourite songs is Hollywood.
There she is on a lifeboat. There she is setting sail. There she is in someone else's dream. Hollywood, what is she? Hollywood.
Because that illustrates, like I was saying before, that almost mosaic quality to the music, where it's very, very intricately put together, all sorts of lovely little production touches and flourishes. You get the sense that he kind of laboured a long time in the studio. He kind of had the song and then really went to town on the arrangements. So you're kind of thinking of Stevie Wonder, you're thinking of Todd Rundgren, you may be even thinking of maybe kind of classic period Jeff Lynne and ELO. Really highly melodic and everything in its place, everything really kind of pristine. But it's got a looseness to it which links it back to the kind of 60s. You know, it's not a kind of cold sounding production. It has a 60s and a 70s thing going on. And in fact, I'd say, as well as the influences that I mentioned, you could probably stir in a bit of classic 70s soft rock. You know, think a little bit of Supertramp here and there, or maybe going into the 80s, you occasionally hear little flashes of, say, Bruce Hornsby and the Range style piano. He's not afraid to kind of dice with more middle of the road type stuff, but he's not a middle of the road artist. You know, it's quite kind of experimental in its way. Okay, so the 4th album, released in 1997, was Egyptology, and this contained the absolutely huge hit single She's the One. It was a hit single for World Party, but in later years it became a big hit for Robbie Williams of Take That. And if there's one song that you're going to know by World Party and Karl, it's likely to be that one, and it's probably because you've heard the version by Robbie.
And if there's somebody calling me on, she's the one.
But this is a good album. I don't think World Party ever made a bad album. He had a very consistent approach. I think perhaps because he wasn't that prolific, he didn't have a huge fast work rate, so the stuff that he did produce was always of a high standard. So that's a good album, definitely worth checking out. Okay, so that was 1997, and then Karl took a few years away from World Party. He came back in the year 2000 with this rather fine record, Dumbing Up. It contains some really good stuff. The best track on this for me is the song High Love, which is absolutely beautiful. It's about it's 6.5 minutes long, nearly 7 minutes. And I mentioned earlier about the Dylan influence, and Karl could do this thing where he would write really long songs. I mean, High Love is 7 minutes long, and it just kind of winds and meanders, and it's just really beautiful. And it sounds like something which could maybe have been on Blonde on Blonde. Nice kind of warm analogue sound to this record. Now, unfortunately, about a year after this record was released, Karl suffered a very serious brain aneurysm, which left him unable to speak, unable to write songs, unable to perform, which is obviously terrible for him. The one kind of godsend was that Robbie Williams had done this cover version of She's the One, which kept a revenue stream coming in for Karl, and that meant he was able to continue having a good quality of life during this what must have been a really awful, atrocious time for him. And but of course it did mean that his career was completely put on hold, and we didn't hear anything of him at all. It took him 5 years to recuperate from that. In 2012, World Party released a 5-CD 70-song collection of new songs, live recordings and cover versions entitled Archaeology, which I don't actually have yet. And then the band came back, and he did make a recovery, a full recovery, and he toured extensively in America in 2012. He toured England for the first time in 12 years, and he played the Royal Albert Hall in London. So he did finally make a comeback. I think it's a real shame that a talent as major as that was really put out of action for a long time, and it's a real shame. Now the good news is, a few weeks ago I was on Facebook, and I went to the World Party Facebook page, and there was a link there saying something like "Chat to Karl" or something like that. So I thought, wow. So I clicked on it, and I was able to leave a message in Facebook Messenger, and a few nights later I noticed I'd had a reply from Karl saying, "Hi, what did you want to chat about?" So I was absolutely amazed. So I asked him how he was, and I asked him if there was going to be any more World Party stuff, and he said, "Well, strange you asked me that, because I've just managed to finish making my new home studio, and I'm going to go into the studio in 2019 and start some recording again." He said, "I've got enough songs written for an album, so I'm going to go back in and make another World Party album." So I was absolutely thrilled to hear that. So hopefully, maybe, I'm not sure if it's going to be in 2019 or maybe next year, we should hopefully have some new material from Karl and World Party. So that should be good. So that's it. That's my little tribute or profile of World Party and Karl Wallinger. Like I said, if you don't know their music, I would start with Goodbye Jumbo. I think that's probably their most consistent work. And then maybe after that move on to Bang. But really, you can check out all their stuff. Like I said, he had a very, he kind of set the bar high for himself early on, and did manage to maintain a very consistent approach all the way through. And so, hope you enjoyed the video. Leave some comments below, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.